The former Atlanta police officer who shot and killed Rayshard Brooks is now facing felony murder charges. Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard announced those charges against that man, Garrett Rolfe, earlier today. Rolfe shot Brooks in the back as he was running away over the weekend. A scuffle started when Rolfe and another officer tried to arrest Brooks for DUI when they found him asleep in his car in the Wendy's drive-through line. Brooks was able to take one of the officer's tasers and aimed it at Rolfe's direction and fired it at him. You see that happening right there. As he ran away, Rolfe then shot him. So joining us now to talk about the latest in this case is criminal defense attorney and KUSI contributor Vic Bajaj. Good to see you, Vic. How are you?
Likewise, doing well. Thank you so much.
Can you just take us through both sides of the argument in this case, what the defense will likely argue and what the prosecution will say?
Absolutely. I'll start with the prosecution, and the district attorney in Fulton County there, Paul Howard, laid out his case today at a very lengthy press conference. And in this press conference, he indicated that there was not a justification for the shooting by Officer Rolfe, and that Officer Brosnan, who was backing up Officer Rolfe and present, is also guilty of certain charges in the district attorney's estimation and evaluation of the evidence. So from the district attorney or the prosecutor's point of view, the case is very simple. Mr. Brooks had a taser, nothing but a taser. The officers knew the taser was discharged twice, which made that taser inoperable and could not cause harm to anyone else. And with this knowledge and with a retreating Mr. Brooks, the officer fired 3 shots, 2 of which hit Mr. Brooks and caused his death. From the defense point of view, this is going to be what we would put under the umbrella of a heat of passion type issue. Things move in a split second when you're a law enforcement officer. And while the interaction between law enforcement and Mr. Brooks was quite calm, as Mr. Paul Howard, the district attorney, laid out in his case today during the press conference, it quickly turned violent. Mr. Brooks took the taser from the officer's waistband and used that taser. He actually discharged it twice. Now, the harm from the defense point of view would be that if the taser was discharged and actually struck an officer, that officer's sidearm or his weapon, his gun, would have been available to Mr. Brooks. So things moved so quickly, the defense will assert that the officer did not have the time in the split seconds to decide whether or not the adequate number of discharges of that taser had occurred and whether there was lethal force required. It's a tough case both ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've heard the argument, you just kind of said it, is that if somebody's pointing a taser at you, that's generally considered non-lethal. You can't use lethal force against non-lethal force. But if that taser goes off and strikes you, you become incapacitated. The person who just took your taser certainly might grab your gun while you're on the ground kind of shaking from the taser and then could kill you. So that means maybe deadly force was needed in order to combat the taser.
That's correct, and I would agree with that assertion. From the defense point of view, looking at it through that lens, I would say we'd have to break it down chronologically. While the interaction with Mr. Brooks and Officer Rolfe was quite lengthy and a calm demeanor, as we indicated, with Mr. Brooks in an inebriated and clearly inebriated state, when you grab an officer's taser, it's the same thing as grabbing his sidearm, his 9mm Glock. That's police issue. And if you look, and all our listeners and viewers take a moment to look at the body cam footage, the camera that the officer was wearing when this interaction took place, it tells an incredibly detailed story. The officer, in my opinion, may have exercised extraordinarily poor judgment by having that taser in a position where Mr. Brooks could obtain it and use it against him. Again, this was a split-second decision, and the issue will be whether Officer Rolfe, by his actions afterwards, evidenced an issue or an impetus to kill Mr. Brooks other than just an investigation and a fleeing suspect.
What do you tell police officers? They've got a tough job. They have to apprehend suspects on a daily basis, and you get into a situation where the person is resisting arrest. You've got to take them into custody. That's your job. And on the other hand, you've got to kind of keep measuring your force with their force, and you can't go above because, you know, then something might happen.
Well, that's exactly right, Logan, and it is a very thin line. It's very difficult to give the adequate training on how to deal with an issue like this. This is an issue that, while people may indicate the taser was non-lethal, as we had described and discussed just a moment ago, it could have very well turned into a lethal circumstance. Whether you're on the prosecutorial side or the defense side, one thing is a static truth. It is difficult to be a law enforcement officer. You add the umbrella of what we're dealing with politically in our country and with law enforcement tactics in our country, it is almost impossible to operate within an academic compartment when you're dealing in the practical streets of the United States of America. I don't know how to educate these officers. I don't think anybody has a silver bullet, so to speak, to be able to train them in a gospel-like clear way. It's extraordinarily difficult, and Logan, to answer your question, in my experience trying these cases in front of juries and obtaining acquittals, it's something that I think is frankly impossible to teach.
Vic Bajaj, great insight. We appreciate it. As always, thanks for coming on the program, Vic. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. My pleasure.
All right.